A sterile millionaire can't believe it. When a humble country girl saves his life and gives him what he always wanted. Before we dive into this incredible story of fate, heartbreak, and miracles, do us a huge favor and hit that like button to support our channel. And make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an emotional roller coaster like this one. Thank you. The roar of the V8 engine was a feral scream against the serene morning silence of Napa Valley. Inside the gleaming black Aston Martin, Ethan Cole barely heard it. The only sound that registered was the venomous echo of his ex-wife's final words, words that had become the relentless soundtrack to his hollow existence. "You will never be a father, Ethan. You are a failure, a dead end." His knuckles were white on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. Miles of pristine vineyards, bathed in the golden California sunrise, blurred into a meaningless green and gold smear on either side of the winding country road. This sprawling estate, the envy of the wine-making world, his ancestral home, felt less like a paradise and more like a gilded cage, a constant, beautiful reminder of the one thing his fortune couldn't buy. A legacy. The memory, sharp and cruel, made his foot press harder on the accelerator. 100, 110, 120 miles per hour. The speedometer was climbing, but he was going nowhere, just racing from a ghost. That's why he didn't see it until it was far too late. The massive, ancient oak tree that had fallen across the road during a storm the night before. A final, unmovable obstacle. What do you think drives a person to such a point of reckless despair? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The impact wasn't a sound. It was a physical event that tore the world apart. A deafening symphony of tortured metal, shattering glass, and the sickening crunch of the car's carbon fiber bodywork disintegrating against solid wood. The Aston Martin spun through the air in a terrifying, weightless ballet before flipping. Once, twice, and finally landing upside down in a ditch, its magnificent engine groaning its last breath. Silence. Then, pain. A blinding, all-consuming agony shot up from Ethan's left leg, which was pinned and grotesquely twisted under the crushed dashboard. The seatbelt, his savior, was now his captor, cutting deep into his shoulder. The coppery scent of his own blood mixed with the acrid smell of leaking gasoline and scorched earth, filling the cramped, inverted space. He screamed, a raw, guttural sound swallowed by the indifferent calm of the valley. As the sun climbed higher, baking the mangled wreck, Ethan's hope began to drain away with his strength. His vision blurred, the edges turning dark. He was going to die here, alone, a forgotten headline in the business section. As his consciousness began to fade, a shadow fell across the shattered windshield. A figure, silhouetted against the blinding sun. An angel? "My God, are you okay in there?" a voice called out, laced with frantic urgency. Ethan could only manage a faint groan. "Help! Me!" The angel didn't hesitate. Clara Evans, her hands still smudged with soil from her morning's work in her small flower nursery, threw herself at the wreck. With a strength born of pure adrenaline, she wrenched at the buckled driver's side door. It groaned in protest, but she pulled again and again, her muscles screaming until, with a final metallic shriek, it gave way. With breathtaking determination for someone so seemingly delicate, she crawled inside, her focus absolute. She worked the release on the seatbelt, her small hands fumbling, but relentless, until he was free. Then she braced herself against the roof and with a surge of impossible strength, helped to heave the mangled dashboard just enough to free his leg. Every second was an eternity, but she finally dragged him, inch by agonizing inch, from the metallic tomb. As she knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her own cotton skirt to fashion a makeshift tourniquet around his bleeding leg. Ethan looked up at her face. Framed by loose strands of chestnut hair and smudged with dirt, her hazel eyes were filled with a fierce compassion that cut through his haze of pain. It was the urgency, the courage, the sheer, unhesitating humanity in her that captivated him, even as he teetered on the brink of unconsciousness. "Stay with me, okay? I'm going for help," she said, her voice a lifeline. He managed to grab her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't leave." Clara looked from his desperate eyes to the empty road and back again. She gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "Okay," she promised. "I'll stay, but we need help, and we need it now." Waving her arms frantically, she flagged down a farm tractor chugging along in the distance. Within what felt like a lifetime, Ethan was being carefully loaded into an ambulance, the piercing wail of its siren finally breaking the valley's peace. As they sped away towards Queen of the Valley Medical Center, the last thing he saw was the face of the woman who had pulled him from the jaws of death. He didn't know her name, but he knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that destiny had just violently intervened in his life. For the next few days, in the sterile white world of his private hospital room, the image of Clara's face was a persistent, haunting fever dream. She was a stranger, yet he felt an inexplicable connection to her, the woman who had appeared in his darkest hour. Who was she? And why did he feel that their story, born in the wreckage of his despair, had only just begun? Upon his release, hobbling on crutches and feeling more alive than he had in years, Ethan had a singular mission: to find her. One of his vineyard foremen, a lifelong local, recognized his description instantly. "Ah, you mean Clara Evans," he said. "Poor girl. A widow. Lives in that little cottage over by Miller Creek. Sells the most beautiful flowers at the farmer's market on Saturdays. Keeps to herself, mostly." When Ethan finally arrived at her small, rustic cottage, the scene that greeted him stole his breath. He found her there, kneeling in a sprawling garden of vibrant, fragrant orchids, her hands covered in rich, dark earth, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. She was a part of this place, as natural and beautiful as the flowers she nurtured. "Clara!" he called out, his voice hoarse with emotion. She looked up, startled, wiping her hands on her apron. A look of recognition, then concern, washed over her face. "Ethan, you're okay." "I'm okay because of you," he said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. He paused, leaning on his crutch, his eyes locking with hers. "I had to thank you. I can't just forget that you risked your life for me." Clara offered a small, hesitant smile, but a shadow flickered in her eyes, a hint of a sorrow he couldn't yet understand. "You don't need to thank me, Ethan. Just live. That's enough." Her simple, profound words struck him. For years, he had merely existed, going through the motions of a life defined by wealth and status. But he hadn't truly lived. "It's not just gratitude, Clara," he pressed, taking another step. "I felt like I needed to see you again. Could we maybe talk? I promise I won't take up much of your time." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze searching. What did she see? A broken man? A rich man looking to pay a debt? Finally, with a small sigh, she gestured toward her cottage. "All right," she said softly. "Come in. I was just about to make some tea. It helps calm the nerves." He followed her into the simple home, where the air was filled with the scent of fresh brewed herbal tea and drying flowers hanging from the rafters. She led him to a rustic wooden chair at her small kitchen table. "How's the leg?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine concern, as she poured steaming tea into 2 mismatched ceramic mugs. "Improving. It still hurts like hell, but I'll survive," he said, trying to make light of it. Thanks to you. As she brought the mugs to the table, her eyes fell on the bulky dressing beneath his pant leg. Can I take a look, just to make sure it's not getting infected? He nodded, surprised again by her gentle, take-charge nature. She knelt before him, her touch delicate, but sure as she inspected the wound. It's healing well. You're taking good care of it. As she returned to her seat, he took a sip of the tea, the warmth spreading through him like a balm. Clara, I don't think you have any idea what you did for me out there. I want you to know, if you ever need anything at all, I'm here for you. She looked away, a familiar discomfort settling over her features. I didn't do anything special, Ethan. And believe me, there are more important things in the world. Like what? He asked, intrigued. Clara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Some things are just complicated. Not everything can be fixed with money or grand gestures. Ethan saw that shadow in her eyes again, a deep-seated sadness that he couldn't comprehend. Before he could press further, she stood abruptly. But enough about that. Drink your tea. It will help you rest. He nodded, but as he sat in her quiet, fragrant kitchen, he knew that this woman held secrets. Something in her gaze, in her carefully chosen words, captivated him, and he felt, with a growing certainty, that he had to uncover the story behind the woman who had saved his life. The silence in the small kitchen was thick with unspoken words as Ethan held the warm mug of tea. The space was humble, but filled with a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in his own cavernous, empty mansion. So what's your story, Clara? He asked gently, breaking the silence. How did you end up here? She offered a faint, melancholy smile. After my husband Daniel passed away, I needed a new start. This little house was all I could afford. I started growing flowers to sell at the market. It's hard work, but it's honest. Ethan nodded, sensing there was more to her story than she was letting on. The mention of her late husband was fleeting, but the pain was still palpable. You do all this by yourself? It can't be easy. It's not, she admitted with a shrug. But you find a way. The neighbors help out when they can. That's how it works in a small community. As she spoke, he studied her. There was no plea for pity in her voice, no hint of self-importance. She possessed an authenticity that made him feel profoundly inadequate, his vast fortune suddenly feeling like a pile of meaningless paper compared to her quiet resilience. Have you ever thought about leaving? He asked, the question sounding clumsy and patronizing as soon as it left his lips. Going to a bigger city where there are more opportunities? Clara laughed, but it was a sound tinged with bitterness. Opportunities for who, Ethan? People like me don't have many options in the big city. Besides, this is my home. I love what I do, even if it isn't glamorous. He looked down, ashamed. I didn't mean to offend you. I know, she said, her voice softening. It's just that sometimes people don't understand. But it's okay. He looked around her kitchen again, at the hand-embroidered art on the walls and the simple vase of wildflowers on the table. It was a life built from scratch, filled with care and intention. Have you had dinner? She asked suddenly, shifting the mood. No, not yet. Well, you're not going anywhere with that leg, she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. I'll make something simple. It's not much, but it'll do. He wanted to protest, to tell her he could have his personal chef deliver a 5-star meal in under an hour, but something in her firm kindness stopped him. He simply nodded as she moved to the small pantry. As she gathered potatoes, onions, and a rustic loaf of bread, he watched, mesmerized by her effortless grace. He was so accustomed to people who performed, who were always trying to impress him. But Clara had no idea of the scale of his wealth. To her, he was just a man she had helped, a neighbor. And you? She asked, her back still to him. How did you end up in Napa? You seem different from the people around here. He hesitated. He hadn't yet revealed that he was the owner of the sprawling Cole estate, the legendary vineyard that bordered her small property. He decided on the truth. "I own the vineyard next door." Clara froze, a pan held midair. Her eyes widened as she turned to face him, a look of shock and perhaps a little discomfort on her face. The big estate on the other side of the ridge? That's the one." She placed the pan on the stove, her hands trembling slightly. I had no idea. I thought you were a manager or something." He chuckled softly. "That's exactly what I wanted you to think. I moved back here a few years ago, trying to get away from my old life. I don't like to talk about it much." She nodded, but he saw her expression shift. He could almost hear the gears turning in her head, calculating the immense chasm between their worlds. "Well, that explains the sports car you managed to wreck," she said, a hint of her previous lightness returning. "Are you upset?" he asked, worried the revelation had erected a wall between them. "No, of course not," she said with a smile, but there was an edge to her tone that bothered him. "It's just curious, thinking of someone like you sitting here in my kitchen." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he wasn't so different, but he didn't know how. As the smell of a simple, home-cooked stew began to fill the air, Clara served dinner. It was a rustic vegetable and lentil soup with thick slices of bread, but to Ethan, it tasted more satisfying than any Michelin-starred meal he'd ever had. "This is delicious," he said with genuine appreciation. "Thank you. It's nothing special, just what I could make with what I have." "Sometimes the simple things are the best," he replied, looking at her meaningfully. They continued to talk as they ate, and Ethan felt a novel sense of ease. There were no pretenses, no hidden agendas. It was just an honest conversation, and it touched him in a way he hadn't expected. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, feeling a contentment that had been absent from his life for years. "I think you've saved my life twice now, Clara." She looked at him, puzzled. "Twice?" "Yes, first in the accident, and now by reminding me what's real." A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she said nothing. As silence settled between them again, Ethan felt a deep desire to prolong this moment, this connection. Yet at the same time, he sensed that mystery about her, an invisible barrier he knew he'd have to breach to truly understand the woman who was so unlike anyone he'd ever known. The days that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan, using the pretense of wanting his neglected gardens revived, hired Clara. It was an excuse, and they both knew it, but it was one they silently agreed to. Each morning, she would arrive, her quiet presence transforming not just the overgrown flower beds, but the very atmosphere of the estate. Ethan found himself drawn to the garden whenever she was there. He'd watch from his study window as she worked with a focused passion, her hands deftly pulling weeds, pruning roses, and coaxing life back into the dormant soil. He saw how she spoke to the plants, her voice a low, encouraging murmur. She didn't just garden. She nurtured. "You don't have to stare, you know," she said one afternoon, without looking up from a stubborn patch of lavender, a playful smile on her lips. Caught, Ethan laughed and limped out onto the terrace. "I'm not staring. I'm supervising my investment." She finally looked up, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "And how is your investment doing, Mr. Cole?" "It's the best decision I've made in years," he said, his voice more serious than he intended. One afternoon, as Clara was training a climbing rose onto a trellis, the sky turned a menacing shade of gray. The wind picked up, whipping through the valley with a sudden fury, carrying the scent of rain. "Clara!" Ethan called from the house. "You need to get inside." "It's fine. I'm almost done," she yelled back, her determination overriding her common sense. Before he could argue, a violent gust tore the trellis from her grasp, sending it clattering to the ground. Clara stumbled, shielding her face from the dust and debris. Ethan didn't hesitate. Ignoring the sharp protest from his healing leg, he rushed out into the burgeoning storm. "Come on, you're going to get hurt." He grabbed her hand, his touch sending an unexpected jolt through them both, and pulled her toward the safety of the house just as the heavens opened up. They collapsed inside, soaked and breathless, the sound of the torrential rain drumming against the roof. Clara was shivering slightly, and Ethan's protective instincts took over. "I'll get you a towel," he said, his voice laced with concern. He returned a moment later and lit the grand fireplace in the living room. Soon, the space was filled with a warm, comforting glow. "Are you always this stubborn?" he asked, a gentle tease in his voice as she dried her hair. She laughed, a genuine, beautiful sound. "I just don't like leaving things unfinished." "Well, sometimes you have to remember to take care of yourself first," he said, his gaze intense. She looked up at him, and the silence that fell between them was different. It was charged, filled with an unspoken energy. "Why are you doing all this, Ethan?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. "Hiring me for the garden, spending all this time with me. It doesn't make sense for someone like you." He took a step closer, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Because I want to be near you, Clara," he confessed, the truth feeling both terrifying and liberating. "Because you remind me of what's real and what's important. And to be honest, being with you is the only thing that's made any sense at all lately." She was silent, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else he couldn't quite decipher. "My life is complicated, you know," she said finally. "Everyone's life is complicated, Clara. Not like mine," she insisted, a deep sadness coloring her words. "I have limits, things I can't change." "I'm not asking you to change anything," he said, taking another step closer. "I just want you to know that I'm here, if you need me." She looked at him then, truly looked at him, as if trying to decide if she could trust him. "You don't know what you're getting into." "Maybe not," he admitted softly, "but I think it's worth finding out." That night, the storm trapped Clara at the estate. After a simple dinner, they prepared together, a task that felt more intimate than any of the lavish dates of his past. They sat by the fire. He finally told her everything about Isabel, the cold diagnosis of his infertility, and the brutal way his marriage had dissolved, leaving him feeling like a hollow shell of a man. "She made it clear that I wasn't enough," he confessed, the old wound feeling raw. "That if I couldn't be a father, I was worthless." Clara reached out and placed her hand gently on his. "That's not true, Ethan. You are so much more than that." He looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." He knew then, with absolute clarity, that he was falling in love with her. He didn't know what secrets she was holding back, what walls she had built around her heart. But as the storm raged outside, he made a silent vow. He would be patient, he would be strong, and he would do whatever it took to break through and show her that they could build something real together. The morning after the storm, the world seemed washed clean. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of the living room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Clara awoke on the plush sofa, a thick cashmere blanket tucked around her. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and the house was perfectly still. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel a sense of peace, a feeling so foreign it was almost startling. Then, the reality of her situation, waking up in the home of a millionaire who was rapidly becoming far more than an employer, rushed back in, bringing with it a familiar wave of anxiety. Ethan found her standing by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked gardens. He was holding a tray with 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a plate of freshly baked scones. "Good morning," he said softly. I fell asleep. "I'm sorry," she stammered, feeling flustered. "Don't be," he said, setting the tray down. "You were exhausted. Besides, I'm glad you stayed." His presence filled the room, not with intimidation, but with a quiet strength that was both comforting and terrifying to her. As they sipped their coffee, the unspoken confession of the night before hung in the air between them. Clara knew she couldn't keep her own secrets locked away if she was going to let this man into her life, no matter how much it scared her. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling, slightly. "There's something you need to know about me." He turned his full attention to her, his expression open and patient. "My husband, Daniel. He didn't just die. He was a soldier. He was killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago." The words came out in a rush, as if she feared they would get stuck if she paused. "We were high school sweethearts. He was my whole world. When he died, a part of me died with him." She took a shaky breath. "But that's not all. A few weeks after he was deployed for the last time, I found out I was pregnant." Ethan's heart clenched, but he remained silent, letting her tell her story in her own time. "I was so excited. I wrote him letters every day, telling him about the baby, about our future, but I never got to tell him in person." Tears welled in her eyes, tears she had held back for years. "There was a complication with the pregnancy, a rare condition. I lost the baby. It was a little girl. I lost her just a month before I lost Daniel." The confession hung in the air, heavy and heartbreaking. "I came here to escape," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "To start over where no one knew my story, where I wasn't the tragic widow. The flowers, they were the only thing that felt alive when everything else felt dead. They were my way of holding on." Finally, he understood the source of her sadness, the reason for the walls around her heart. She wasn't just a widow. She was a woman who had lost her husband and her child, her entire future, in one devastating blow. Without a word, Ethan moved to the sofa and sat beside her. He didn't offer empty platitudes or easy reassurances. He simply wrapped his arms around her and held her as she finally let herself cry, her body shaking with the force of 3 years of pent-up grief. He held her tight, absorbing her pain, his own heart aching for her. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he whispered into her hair. "You've been carrying all of this alone." They stayed like that for a long time, the silence broken only by her quiet sobs. When her tears finally subsided, she looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "I'm scared, Ethan," she admitted. "I'm scared of feeling anything again. It hurts too much." "I'm scared too," he confessed, his voice raw. "But maybe we can be scared together." In that moment of shared vulnerability, the last of the barriers between them crumbled. It wasn't about a rich man and a poor girl anymore. It was about two broken people finding solace in each other's arms, two souls who had been shipwrecked by life finding a safe harbor. Just as this fragile new beginning was taking root, the past made its unwelcome return. The sleek silver sports car that pulled up the long driveway was a jarring intrusion into their peaceful world. Isabel, Ethan's ex-wife, emerged from the car, looking every bit the polished, formidable woman he remembered. "Ethan," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she spotted them on the terrace. "I was in the area and thought I'd pick up the last of my things." Clara stiffened in Ethan's arms, and he felt a protective anger surge through him. "Isabel," he said, his voice cold and steady, "this isn't a good time." Isabel's eyes flickered to Clara, her gaze sweeping over her with blatant disdain. "Oh, I see," she said, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "You've found a new project. How quaint. The rich man and the humble little gardener." "That's enough," Ethan warned, standing up to place himself between the two women. But Clara, wiping the last of her tears away, found a strength she didn't know she had. "It's all right, Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She met Isabel's condescending stare without flinching. "I'm Clara Evans. It's a pleasure to meet you." Isabel laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Darling, I'm sure it is. Let me give you some advice. Don't get too attached. Ethan has a condition. He can't give you the one thing a woman like you would want from a man like him. A family. The words were meant to be a fatal blow, but they had an unintended effect. They solidified Ethan's resolve. "Get your things and get out, Isabel," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You are no longer welcome here." As Isabel swept into the house, Clara turned to Ethan, her face pale. "She's right, isn't she? About you." "That's what the doctors said," he admitted. "It's why she left me." Clara looked at him, her hazel eyes filled with a new, fierce emotion. "She didn't leave you because you couldn't have children," she said with sudden clarity. "She left because she's incapable of real love." And in that moment, as Isabel's venomous words hung in the air, a dizzy spell washed over Clara. She swayed, her hand flying to her head. "Clara, are you okay?" Ethan cried, catching her as her legs gave way, and she fainted in his arms. The frantic drive to the hospital was a blur of terror for Ethan. Holding Clara's limp hand, his mind raced with 1,000 horrible possibilities. Isabel, forgotten in the back seat, remained silent, her earlier bravado replaced by a shocked unease. In the sterile, impersonal waiting room, every tick of the clock was a form of torture. Finally, a doctor with kind eyes emerged. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan shot to his feet. "How is she? Is she going to be okay?" The doctor smiled, a warm, reassuring expression. "She's going to be fine, Mr. Cole. She's just dehydrated and exhausted. But there's something else. Something you should know." Ethan braced himself. "Ms. Evans is pregnant," the doctor announced. "About 8 weeks along, and from the initial ultrasound, it appears she's expecting triplets." The world tilted on its axis. Pregnant. Triplets. The words didn't compute. From behind him, Isabel let out a strangled gasp. "That's impossible," she declared, striding forward. "He can't have children. He's sterile." The doctor looked from Isabel's furious face to Ethan's stunned one. Ethan finally found his voice, a whisper filled with dawning, earth-shattering realization. He looked at Isabel, truly seeing the deceit in her eyes for the first time. "It was never me, was it?" he said, the pieces of his past clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "It was you. You were the one who couldn't have children." Isabel's face crumpled, the lie she had maintained for years finally exposed. I couldn't handle it, Ethan," she cried. "You had everything. I couldn't be the broken one." He looked at her, not with anger, but with a profound, weary pity. "You made me believe I was a failure," he said quietly. "You let me carry that pain, all because you were too cowardly to face the truth." Without another word, Isabel turned and fled, her clicking heels echoing her defeat down the long hospital corridor. The doctor gently touched Ethan's arm. "I think she needs you now." Ethan walked into Clara's room as if in a dream. She was awake, looking pale, but peaceful. "Ethan," she whispered. He knelt by her bed, taking her hand. "You gave me quite a scare," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry," she said, her thumb stroking his knuckles. "Don't be," he said, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face as tears streamed down his cheeks. "You just gave me the greatest news of my entire life." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "News?" He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "You're pregnant, Clara, and not just with one baby. We're having triplets." Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth as tears of shock and happiness filled her eyes. "What? Triplets?" "3 of them," he confirmed, pressing her hand to his lips. "You're carrying 3 little miracles, Clara." "Oh, Ethan," she sobbed, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "I was so scared. But now I feel like everything is going to be all right." "It will be," he promised, holding her tight, feeling the profound shift in his universe. "Because we're in this together, and no matter what comes next, we'll face it." In that hospital room, Surrounded by the beeps and hums of machines, they made a silent promise to never let the ghosts of the past or the judgment of the world define them. As Ethan leaned in to kiss her, it felt as though all the pain and loneliness they had endured had led them to this perfect, miraculous moment. A new life, a new vintage was beginning for them. Richer, fuller, and more beautiful than anything Ethan Cole could have ever imagined. The love that blossomed so unexpectedly in the heart of Napa Valley became the foundation of a family built not on wealth or status, but on resilience, truth, and second chances. Ethan, who once believed he was cursed to a life without heirs, discovered that his greatest legacy wouldn't be his vineyards, but the 3 beautiful children he raised with the woman who saved him in every way that a person can be saved. Clara, who thought her heart was buried with her past, learned that love could grow again, stronger and more vibrant than before, even in the most wounded soil. Their story serves as a powerful reminder that our deepest pains can often lead to our greatest joys, and that the family we are destined for is not always the one we plan, but the one that finds us when we need it most. True wealth is not what we own, but who we have to love. And sometimes, the most devastating crash is the very thing that sets us on the right path. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you love, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales that will warm your soul. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you in the next story.